It's a great honor to be with all of you here today, along with our assembled cast of luminaries who are spirited away at a couple of these tables over here on the side of the room, to consider the challenges and the opportunities of moving toward a world without oil and the role that design can play in helping us get there. I'm Jesse Ashlock, and I'll be playing host today. And as many of you may already know, I was the last editor of ID Magazine, the International Design Magazine, which announced its closure last month after 55 years in print. I'm personally concerned that we'll be living in a world without magazines long before we find ourselves in a world without oil. But of course, if we did live in a world that was truly without oil, let's imagine for a second that a DC Comics-style supervillain just swooped in from the sky tomorrow and turned all of the world's oil reserves into marmalade. Then we would have no magazines, at least not the kind that are printed with petroleum-based ink, or EVA-based adhesives. And even a green magazine that had greened its printing processes would still have to deal with the nettlesome problem of distributing its product. Similarly, I'm sure I'm not the only one who's had the thought that in a world without oil, it would be rather difficult to have conferences like A World Without Oil. Jet fuel and gasoline got me here today, and I'm sure oil got most of you here as well. And I'm told that at least one invited speaker declined to attend this conference because doing so would have forced him to break his carbon diet, which I understand is also becoming an increasingly frequent response among people who think about energy and climate for a living and get invited to conferences like this one and Davos and TED to talk about their ideas. Now, you could opt instead to attend only teleconferences from the comfort of your own home, which would both reduce your carbon footprint and save you money. But it's worth noting that your computer, your monitor, your external hard drive, your cell phone, your task chair, and the entire ecosystem of home office products that you rely on all rely for their existence on an array of plastic polymers and petro-based materials and are the product of a convoluted global supply chain involving dozens of countries on every continent on the planet, save Antarctica. In a world without oil, we would have none of those products either. And that shiny new Apple tablet PC that is going to be unveiled next week would remain only a blogger's fever dream. So I'm going to start echoing Nadine right here. Like animal byproducts, petroleum-derived materials find their way into a shockingly broad range of objects that we encounter in our everyday lives, from pesticides to medicine to detergent to paint to cosmetics, textiles to carpets. In America, the average meal travels around 1,500 miles to get to your table, and a suit like the one I'm wearing right now travels several times that far in the course of its assembly. We also drive, on average, in excess of 12,000 miles a year and fly thousands more miles. Oil is built into everything we do. So it's fortunate that we do still have those oil reserves and not marmalade, even though I really like marmalade. But as we all know, the cost of oil is soaring in terms of both environmental impact and real dollars. Katrina and the oil crisis of 2008 were not unrelated phenomena. And whether you believe that peak oil has already arrived or you think it's coming in a few years, I think we can all agree that we're going to find ourselves on the far side of the global oil production bell curve soon enough. And unless we change our way of doing things, the ride down is going to be a lot swifter than the ride up, given our increasing global population and the increasingly ravenous appetites of countries like China and India. The ride down also figures to be dirtier and more expensive, with extraction becoming both more costly and more environmentally harmful, as evidenced by efforts right here in Canada to tap Alberta's oil sands. All of this is a design problem, and it seems sometimes like with each new day there's a new design solution. Some of them are sensible, some seem half-baked. Here are two somewhat arbitrarily chosen extremes. The first comes from Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner of Freakonomics fame, who have in the past suggested that the notion of peak oil is mostly media hype and that the market will sort things out. In their new book, for which they've caught a lot of flack, Super Freakonomics, they propose geoengineering the planet as an alternative to the annoying task of reducing our energy consumption and carbon emissions. On the opposite end of the spectrum comes the transition towns movement that you just heard about, championed by British educator Rob Hopkins, which is caught on like wildfire around the world and involves a set of hyperlocal and ultra-sustainable measures to reduce energy consumption, so a lot of self-sacrifice, at least from one perspective. So basically, you have one design framework that's built around unapologetic energy consumption, and another one that touts strict austerity. So it's like you have Gordon Gekko on the one hand, and you have Gandhi on the other. And speaking for myself, I have to admit that there's a certain intellectual pull to both of these positions. I have a Puritan streak that leads me to feel that I should, give things up in the name of both my own personal well-being and the greater good. And that's an attitude that's actually quite consistent with the historical tone and tenor of the environmental movement. Do no harm, be less bad. At the same time, however, I am, after all, a red-blooded American who came of consciousness in the age of Ronald Reagan. And in early adulthood, I dreamed of owning an late 60s Camaro. Isn't wanton consumption of energy, resources, and things supposed to be my birthright? No, it's not. I'm grateful in many ways for the age of cheap oil because of the great technological progress and global connectedness that it's allowed me to participate in. But I do recognize that that age is coming to an end, and I'm acutely aware of what its costs are. And I think that such awareness impels us to greater individual responsibility, whether we're committing to personal carbon pledges or not. This is one of the ways that we can design our own lives. As it so happens, my own carbon emissions are significantly below American averages, though they're still far above the global norm, thanks in large part to the fact that I share a small apartment in Brooklyn and don't own a car, much less a Camaro. But I do have some gecko in me. For example, I am not willing to sacrifice luxuries like this suit, which was manufactured in Romania for a Belgian designer using wool from God knows where, probably Australia, and which was purchased in Italy by me, an American. And nor am I willing to sacrifice trips like this one. And if I canceled the trip to Peru that I just planned with my girlfriend because I was worried about my carbon footprint and oil depletion, I'm sure she would have my head. So it seems to me that in order to wean us from our addiction to oil, designers must appeal to consumers' inner Gandhis and their inner geckos. Products made with alternative materials like bioplastics and powered by alternative energy sources like solar must appeal to both the good in people and to the part of them that says that greed is good, to their desire to do what's right and to their craving for what's most desirable. This should be a seduction, this transition. Even having said that, however, I also believe that part of the transition to a world without oil must be finding a way out of the relentless churn of the product cycle and the planned obsolescence that attends so many new products, particularly in consumer electronics, the Schlock of the new, as the British design critic John Thackeray has called it. We need to get back to a culture of durable goods, of mending and repair, and stop wasting energy and materials on products with lifespans so brief that if you blink, you might miss them entirely. And when products do stop being useful to us, we need better end-of-life solutions for them so that we stop burying valuable materials and untapped energy in the bowels of the earth. Ultimately, our challenge is to reduce carbon and find viable new sources of energy without having too deleterious an effect on growth. This is a huge systemic problem, one that desperately calls for new ideas and approaches. Lately, we've heard so much about this much vaunted design thinking, often talked about like it's some sort of panacea for all that ails us. And as a result, it's easy to dismiss it as a buzzword. But it's true that the kind of thinking that designers do, the ideating, the creative problem solving, the synthesizing of disparate strands of information, is desperately called for in thinking about how to get us to a world without oil. We need to pay more attention to the design of the world rather than the world of design, as to use Bruce Mau's famous formulation. Because as Einstein said, the world will not evolve past its current state of crisis by using the same thinking that created the situation. So let's listen now to some new ways of thinking.